I'm in a telepathic communication. I'm being asked, so what would you like to do? Would you like to go or would you like to stay? And I remember wanting to go. The feeling inside me was, I really want to go and explore what's on the other side. But simultaneously, even though I'm underwater, I'm able to see my mother on the shore. And I see her standing up. I see her looking. I feel her panic. I'm underwater, but I'm able to see her above the water and I feel her panic. And within seconds, I see a woman moving towards me in a white, old bathing suit. It reminds me of like the Marilyn Monroe era.
My guest today is Lelenea Fulton, who had an NDE as a child and then received many different abilities after her NDE. And I'm so excited to ask her lots and lots of questions. So, Lelenea, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time and I really have a lot of appreciation for you having interest in my story.
Oh, of course. Well, and thank you for wanting to share it with the world because these are very special things and it takes a lot of courage to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. I I was very quiet for a very long time. You never know how such things are received, and I think that we're in a very unique time right now where
Yes.
it's being embraced, and individuality and uniqueness and unique experiences are really being embraced.
Yeah, I agree. So, how long did you actually wait before you really told this story publicly?
Probably about a month ago.
Whoa. Okay. Well, that was quite a few years since you had this
Yeah.
when you were like four,
I was 6, 7. I
six,
was
seven. Okay.
right on that cusp between 6, 7, 8, like right in that time frame. It's not something that we documented or took photos of, so there's no, firm documentation of my exact age and the exact date, but it was around
Well,
that time.
I'm gonna guess your mom probably wanted to forget about this from what I remember of your story. So why don't you go ahead and
Mm,
tell us about your very unique NDE?
mm. Well, I think they're all unique, right? Very few have ever mirrored one another, thankfully. But I was, as I mentioned, that particular age range, and we were in the countryside of Ohio. So there's an area called the Mid Ohio Valley, which borders West Virginia. And it's right outside of the mountains. And so it's more of in a valley area. And there out in the country was this really beautiful large pond that had been buoyed off and designated a public swimming area. There was a fee that you paid for the lifeguard, but it was a very small area. And I mean, it's super remote. So, it's not like people, out here, people from Portland flood the swimming holes in the waterfalls during the summer. And you didn't have a large population nearby to flood the area. So that being said, it was a very, everyone kind of knew everyone that was coming to the swimming hole, the swimming area. And there was also just a small amount of parking. So it was very traditional to double park and block people in, and everyone knew who had which car. And so there was this beautiful lawn that would sit like a hillside where you could watch people swimming, and it was just a few feet to walk into the water, into the beach area. And so everyone knew who was coming and going and who they had to ask to move out in order to leave. And in the parking lot, you can only fit probably about 6 cars, maybe give or take a couple more. And on this particular day, I just started learning to doggy paddle, and there was a deck that was built out in the middle of the buoyed off section of the swimming area, and I would run and jump off that deck into my mom or my dad's arms, and I would always jump towards the shore because the water was more shallow. And on this particular day, there was a young girl, and I still remember what she looked like. And she was running and jumping off the side, off the deeper end. And I remember looking at her and thinking, well, if she can do it, I can do it. We're the same height. I'm sizing her up. And so this is the first time I think I really remember comparing myself to somebody else. And the life lesson, it backfires. Never do it. Comparison's no good. So I see her jumping, and I see it a couple times, and I'm like, well, shit, if she can do it, I can do it. So, my mom's watching me, and I have this little process where I would pivot from one foot to the next and bounce back and forth up until I got to the deck. And then like I would quickly doggy paddle to the ladder and climb up the platform. And then I would run and jump off. And this particular time I decided to jump off the side that she did. And it was a grave mistake because the distance down to the bottom, which I would use the momentum to push myself back up and grab air, was greater than what I had anticipated or was used to. So I didn't give myself enough time to sink down to the bottom and then push myself back up, and it scared me. And in that process, I started to intake water, and then I quickly got myself up to the top, and I'm grabbing breath, simultaneously trying to scream, which, is not a thing that you can do. And so I'm losing air as I'm trying to scream, and then I'm also taking in water. So the drowning process begins, right? And, as an adult, I highly recognize the science behind losing oxygen from your bloodstream and the warm feeling, the euphoric feeling that is associated with the human body in the dying process. And I do recognize that. And I remember in the moment being very warm after I, over a period of time, decided to stop fighting it and stop pushing myself to the surface. And it got to the point where I'd put my arm in the air, and only a certain portion of my arm could extend above the water. And I remember like waving it, thinking, somebody will see it. My mom will see it, some adult, because there was a lot of kids in the water and adults playing. And I could see the beautiful patterns of like young kids swimming around me, kicking their feet, and the sand, being pushed up from the bottom of the floor, coming upward, and the sun, shooting down into the water, into this really beautiful kind of amber colored water, and just the illumination of the sand. And it's probably one of the most beautiful moments in my life. When people are often like, think of a really beautiful moment, people are like envisioning walking in fields. And I actually go back to the moment of my NDE, of watching these fragments of sand get caught in the sunlight while I was dying, because it was just so beautiful. And it was a moment that really allowed me to recognize the beauty of being human, what we take for granted on a daily basis. And in that moment, I was being forced to stand still, to be calm. A calm came over me and settle into the dying process. And it's that calm state that later would surface back into my life to recognize how much of ourselves we can come in contact with, and how much beauty and how much power is behind that calm. So I'm watching these fragments of sand, and I'm watching these little kids paddle all around me. And, I start to recognize that I'm separate from all that. I'm almost an observer of my own death, an observer of the environment around me in the dying process. And it gets to the point where I'm in a telepathic communication. I'm being asked, so what would you like to do? Would you like to go, or would you like to stay? And I remember wanting to go. The feeling inside me was, I really want to go and explore what's on the other side. But simultaneously, even though I'm underwater, I'm able to see my mother on the shore, and I see her standing up. I see her looking. I feel her panic. I'm underwater, but I'm able to see her above the water, and I feel her panic. And I feel her, and she's scanning the surface looking for me. And the panic is starting to really become more and more intense. And it is in this moment of observing her and watching her that I say telepathically, she wouldn't understand. It would destroy her. And I don't think she's strong enough in this life, to handle it. Like, it would destroy her. And so I made the decision. I'm like, I have to stay. And simultaneously with having this discussion, being submerged under the water, also being able to see her outside of the water, all of this is just happening, simultaneously within seconds. That time had slowed down, and it felt like this was like a 30-minute ordeal. And when I decided that I would stay, within seconds, I see a woman moving towards me in a white old bathing suit. It reminds me of like the Marilyn Monroe era, where they would wear these bathing suits that kind of went down and covered the thighs, became almost like a skirt a little bit, not a flowy, but like a tighter skirt. And she had long gray hair in a braid that the end of the strands of her hair was swaying in the water as she was moving towards me. And I could see this very calm glide and swishing back and forth. And my arm is still up in the air at this point. And she pulls me out of the water by that one arm. And I'm moving upward out of the water, and I'm still above the water though, and I can see my mother. Like, my sight is, I'm still able to view what's happening above the water despite simultaneously being below it. And as she's pulling me up, I see my mother catch sight of me, and she's running like all hell broke loose across that water. It almost looked like she was running on water. And she swoops me up from the woman's arms. And even though I'm above the water, looking at my mom's face, looking at the whole moment, I never see the woman's face. I can feel her. I feel her energy. I feel her. I'm grasping for air at this, simultaneously, which was so incredibly painful. And then within that moment, my vision changes, my POV. So I'm no longer looking from outside of myself. With that breath, I'm back in myself. And then my mom grabs me and takes me back to the shore. And, over a significant period of time is, helping me get myself pulled back together, air in my lungs, coughing up all the water. She has words with the lifeguard, who didn't see any of it despite being, on a chair raised above the whole surface. And so she asks me, at this point, it's time to leave. The traumatic event had kind of ruined the day for all of us. And she said, well, we need to say thank you to this woman for saving your life. And she's like, what did the lady look like? Do you remember? And I described what I had saw of her under the water. And we're looking everywhere for this woman, and we don't see the bathing suit. We don't see the woman. And so my mother goes up to each family individually and says, hey, and tells them the story. And they're like, we've never seen a woman that looked like that here. She's not with us. We hope you find her. And then my mom's asking, well, has anyone left? And it's also really bizarre. Like, who saves a child from drowning and doesn't come by, especially when there's like 6 families there, and doesn't come by to be like, so how is she? And then, like, of course, people want to tell their story. Yeah, I just saw her arm hanging out of the water. There's a whole dialogue that is normal to occur in this moment that did not occur. And the woman was not seen, recognized, or heard of. And so it became kind of a family joke, that I had a guide, or an angel that they would refer to, that this entity would actually play a role in my life quite a few times that I should have left, but didn't.
Oh, I am super excited to get into that. But before we do, thank you for sharing that beautiful story. You tell
Mm,
it so fluidly, so
mm,
beautifully. I would have guessed that you've told it lots and lots of times based on the way you told
mm,
it. So I have a few questions. So the voice that you heard,
mhm.
was it masculine or feminine? And did you recognize that voice?
I didn't recognize it to be masculine or feminine because it's not like hearing. When it's telepathic, it's not hearing, it's a knowing, it's a sense. So it's a sense of dialogue and language. It doesn't have a sound. So there is no masculine or feminine, you know, expression to it.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you
Mhm.
now know who that voice was?
No, no, I don't know who she was. In a joking way, I often tell people I believe that she was my future self. Um,
Hmm.
because there was a lot like energetically that felt like me as an adult when I look back onto it and I hold it, that energy and that experience. It's so familial and it's so familiar and it feels like me. And but no, I've never had like an out of body experience or a near death experience where I've come in contact with my guides, or with a future self or a past relative. I think those are absolutely stunning stories, but that's not my story.
That's okay. Your story is uniquely
Mhm.
beautiful to you. So, how long after that happened did you explain to your mom what you experienced? Or because you're only 6 years old, do you think that this is a normal thing and everybody just experiences these perspectives?
So it's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. And I don't remember if I talked to my mother about the telepathic dialogue. Um, I think the trauma of the event was so surreal for me because it scared me regarding water for a very long time.
I bet it did.
Yeah, and so I don't ever recall having that conversation with her. But probably when I was about 17, when I really had my first boyfriend, I remember telling him about the event. And it was the first time that I really opened up about the experience and about the telepathic communication. And and I think that's when I really started having that discussion. And also, there was a lot of aftermath that came with that in terms of experience. I became very obsessed with what was on the other side. I even had resentment for a while regarding my mother because I wanted to go. And because of her, I stayed. And, as a teenager, I was really upset with her quote unquote weakness, my perception of her weakness. She had a very hard, traumatic life. And I knew that this would destroy her. And there was a part of me that resented that because I wanted to be on the other side. And, in the 90s, there was a show that came out or a movie, I think it was called Flatliners. And I wasn't allowed to watch it because I was so obsessed with trying to figure out how I could die and go back over and still come back that watching that movie was like, don't give her any more ideas.
I was going to say that. That's
Yeah.
funny. Well,
Yeah.
what I find really, really fascinating is that here you are, 6 years old. That's super young. And I felt like when you were telling the story and you were asked if you wanted to go back and you made the decision not to go back because your mom wouldn't be strong enough, it didn't
Mhm.
seem like you would have made that decision from a 6-year-old perspective. You would have
No.
made that decision from a higher self
Yes.
perspective. Okay.
Yes.
So, have you since told your mom the full story?
Hmm. Yes, I have
And
since.
did she agree that she would not have been strong enough if that had happened?
So the first time that I think I really articulated it, um, I was doing like a creative writing course, and it was about like I think the topic was something that made you authentic, like a unique perspective or something that's happened to you that hasn't happened to anyone else. And I was like, oh well, shit, I got one. Um,
I have a really good one.
yeah. So I wrote about it, and as I started writing it, which was the first time I think that I had ever done so, it just came flowing as if it happened yesterday. And the smell of the water, the sensation of the water in my nose, the pain of the breath in my lungs, everything surged back and was so powerful and so, it felt so real. Um, that I was able to really go into full detail. And then I sent it to her, because she was intrigued with what I was doing. And I sent it to her. And I remember her saying, I didn't realize all of that had happened in that moment. So I don't know if I had articulated at some point in time because my mother's memory is failing her in many ways. And, it's quite often for her to say, I don't remember that. So it doesn't mean that I didn't articulate it, but definitely when I showed it to her in writing, I think it was more profound to her. She did not articulate whether or not she agreed with me or not. I think she really allowed that to be my experience and my perception. Um, you can't argue losing a child. I think most people would say I would be incredibly weak and it would break me in some way or another. But what I think in a way I knew was going to happen. So it was, I believe wholeheartedly, I don't recall the timeline. She lost her brother, who was her best friend, and her older brother, who she looked up to. He ended up dying of a heart attack in her arms. I want to say maybe 6 months, a year later. And so there's a part of me now looking back on it that almost feels like, if you believe in the whole soul contract concept, there's a part of me that feels like that I knew that something of that magnitude was going to happen to her, and to have two losses within that small time frame would not have allowed her to learn or accomplish what she came here to do.
Mm, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
What an interesting perspective to get as a 6-year-old to
Mm-hmm.
be in full presence. So, I want to talk
Mm-hmm.
about this for a little bit because I think spiritually, this is one of the concepts that people strive to do. They practice. People will spend years and years meditating to
Mm-hmm.
get to the place where they're clearing their mind and they are fully present to have an experience. And here
Mm-hmm.
you have this at the age of 6, and it feels like, from what you've described, that you fully recognize the beauty in
Mm-hmm.
being in a present moment. And you describe that as being one of your most beautiful moments.
Mm-hmm.
So, throughout your life, as you get older, do you keep that part with you where you practice this extreme presence in your life? And if that's true, can you give us a couple of examples of maybe one or two other things that happened to you where you were so extremely present that it was a different experience than somebody would have just normally had it? They just kind of floated through it.
Absolutely. So, what I do recognize going back upon this is that I was in an experience of oneness, because while under the water, um, as I was looking at the fragments of sand and the light, and everything slowed down where time had kind of stopped. And when I say slowed down, people think, oh, like everything just moves around slow, or your perception of time slows down. But it's the movement, it's the way energy moves within this moment, where you can really recognize that time has no value in this moment, or time does not exist here, right? And so while in the dying process, time had no value. It stopped. The way that people were moving all around me, my perception, the way that my eyes were catching and analyzing light was changing. And it felt like I was down there for 15 minutes in this state of awe, totally recognizing that that's not realistic. It was a matter of seconds. But that just the beauty of the world around me at that time was, it had me in a state of awe, and the connection and the amount of love that flooded me. I have never at that age felt that kind of love before. And it filled my whole body. And it resonated, and it was just this vibration. And that feeling would happen to me multiple times throughout my life. And it could just be me sitting in a field journaling, and I would just have this moment of connectedness. And I had many of those moments growing up. And, you can't see the picture when you're in the frame, right? So looking back on it, I'm like, holy shit, how many of those moments I had was unreal. And I felt extremely connected to nature and everything around me. I didn't feel connected to people.
Mm-hmm.
I was an observer often, and I would observe other kids in high school and how they interacted, and just thought that there was an utter cruelty of people who were not awake. They weren't calm. They weren't in the moment. They weren't standing still. And as an observer, I could see that. Not to say that I didn't get caught up in that third dimensional human energy myself, especially as a teenager. But I did recognize it and would view things as an observer for a great deal of my life growing up. And then I had two experiences, one small and one extremely large, where I do wholeheartedly recognize it and know it as an experience of oneness. And I do know that this experience is highly sought after. And what I do recognize is no matter how hard I try to get back there, I can't, because I never had control over it in the first place. And so the first time I was in New York City, and I had this book, The Celestine Prophecy by what's his name? James Redfield, I believe. And what's amazing is my father gave that book to me the first, like, I think it's called The Nine Insights or something, the first book. And I carried that freaking book around with me from the age of 16 all the way up until 24, and never read that damn book. It went overseas with me. It went to Germany. It went all over the United States, Miami, and then finally lands with me in New York, which is so weird. And I finally pick it up and start to read it. And I become obsessed with this book. And there's numerous other books after it, The 10th Insight, The Secret of Shambhala, and then another one is called The Experiential Guide. And I remember reading The Experiential Guide on the subway, and I was so engrossed in this book, and I looked up from the book, and all of a sudden the whole subway was so bright and so illuminated, and I could see light moving from person to person, and I could see everyone's faces. And this is rare for New York City. Everyone's faces looked so illuminated with love, and everyone's smiling. And I recognized in that moment, I was like, holy shit, this book made me high. Like, what is happening with this book? Somebody needs to contact this Mr. Redfield, let him know he's onto something. And I just remember going, oh shit, this is really weird. This is an intense moment. And so I had this feeling that the path that I was on in terms of what I was learning was being illuminated and letting me know this was a synchronicity. This was letting me know, keep going down this path. This is resonating with the cells in your body. This is sparking awareness, like go down this path. Well, I detoured from the path. I lived in New York City, so I detoured.
It was impossible to not.
Yeah. I got sucked up into like the New York drama. And so then it was, I was 42 when this happened, and I'm crossing the border. I was in Vancouver, British Columbia, seeing a friend, and I'm crossing the border back into the US, and I'm reading The Gene Keys by Richard Rudd. Oh, they always have to do with books. So I'm reading The Gene Keys, and I'm like on the third or fourth gene key, and it's backed up traffic, like really intense. And this particular crossing is surrounded by this really beautiful park with monuments. And so there's a lot of people that are crossing through the border and visiting from other countries. It's a very international area. And there's picnics and people playing, and it's cookouts. It's just a really beautiful space. And, I'm backed up in a line crossing over into the US, and, there's about 3 or 4 lanes, right? And my dog's in the back seat, and it's a warm summer day, and I've got the book open on the steering wheel and just reading it as we're slightly inching forward. And I finish with it, and I'm really contemplating and taking in what I read, and it feels so profound and so beautiful. And I hear kind of this like aggressive, like really loud, kind of heavy metal sound type music. And I look over to my right, and I recognize it's a car next to me, and there's about 3 or 4 people in the car. And they're listening to like the heavy metal music, but they all seemed really like low key and mellow and kind of zoned out. And I got really judgmental because my peace was being disrupted, and I was coming from a very kind of entitled, arrogant mindset, and I'm judging them. And I'm like, dude, whatever. And I roll up my windows, and I've got, like classical music or something on, but I recognize like my little human shithead self in this moment. And as I roll out the window, I hear a voice that says, Lelenea, don't judge them. They are you. And it's telepathic, and I hear it, and it's not my voice. And it just, Lelenea, don't judge them. They are you. And I'm looking at them, staring at them. And I start kind of like observing them again from the observer perspective. And as I'm observing them, I realize like I'm kind of looking at their energy, and I'm like, I bet they're really nice people. And I bet if I were to meet them, I would totally like have so much to learn from them and to like experience. And I'm just observing them and studying them as they're inching forward, and I'm inching forward, and this movement happens. And then all of a sudden, my eyesight's diverted to an event that's happening behind them. And it is an Asian boy and a Black boy, and they're playing football, and they're throwing a football back and forth. And they're probably about 7, 8, 9 years old. And they have the most gorgeous energy I've ever seen in my life. It is radiating, and the smiles on their faces are so huge, and they're just ecstatic, and they're in a state of love, and they're having so much fun. And I'm literally feeling them. I'm feeling them. So like to the degree where I'm like, I feel like I am them. I'm almost losing myself in their emotions and in their experience. And I even am able to relate. Oh, I remember having this experience too. I remember being that age and playing, throwing the football back and forth. And so I recognize in this moment that my vibration has changed, and it's very high. It's very high. And I'm scanning, and I move from the boys playing football, and I see the people that they're with having a barbecue, and everything again is so illuminated. It's one of the most beautiful, brightest lights, and it's not radiating upon them, it's radiating out of them. It's a light that's being emitted from them. And so I'm studying the group that they're with a little bit, and I'm just also observing myself, because I'm like, what are you experiencing right now? Like, and I'm like thinking, like, and for a moment, I'm like, did you eat something? Like, like what happened? What, like, where is this coming from? And then I look to my left, and I see a couple international families, and one was a Muslim family, and then another one looked like an Indian family in their traditional garb, and they're separated. And so I first get, hit like the Muslim family, and the father is strolling with his arms behind his back, and he's just got this really beautiful glide and stroll. And he's with his family, and he's got like a daughter and a wife, and they're looking at the monuments and just reading the monuments. And I can see how in love, how proud he is. I could feel this sensation of like, he's proud that he was able to bring his family to this place, and to like allow them to like see these monuments and read the history of this country. And he had pride that he was here, and he had so much love and respect for his wife and daughter. And I could feel all of it. And not only could I feel it, I could feel a story. I could feel the essence of who he was. And I could see again this light radiating from him, and this smile on his face. And I just fell in love with him in this moment, and fell in love with his family. And I'm still an observer of myself, recognizing this is so profound. And I'm like, what am I experiencing right now? What am I seeing? And so I moved to the Indian family, and it's a larger family. It's a husband and wife, a couple daughters, and it looked like some other family members. And again, I'm watching the pride, I'm watching the love, and I'm seeing these storylines and feeling these narratives, right? And I'm just watching these people illuminate some of the most beautiful light. And then I see the two boys with the football. They've made it on this side now, and they're throwing the football and they're moving past. But it's so surreal. It's like, when people make these little videos of what they think heaven is like, and everything's moving in slow motion and kids are playing. That's almost what it looked and felt like. It felt like watching a movie of a portrayal of what heaven would be or look like. And I remember thinking, like, heaven is right here. Heaven is a dimension within us. And it was a knowing, like, I'm experiencing heaven, and it's an experience within myself. And I see the trees now, and there was some like wheatgrass, and it's all moving very slow. And the way that the boys are running, playing the football, it's all very slow. And I recognize that time is an illusion, and what I'm experiencing is not there. There is no time in this moment. So again, feeling tethered to my NDE and then that experience in the New York subway, I'm like, this is familiar. I recognize it. I've been here before, but this is a more heightened version. And so I'm moving past the trees and I'm moving past the grass, and I start to see light, like a thread of light that's moving through the trees, and the boys are running past the trees, and I see the light moving through them. And so now I see this light moving through all of these people, these entities, the trees, and the light is coming back to me, and I'm feeling the light. I'm holding this light, and it feels like love. And it's like, just thinking about it feels like I'm going to burst out of my body. Like the meat suit I'm wearing is not strong enough to hold these emotions and these feelings. And I was clearly moved by these emotions and feelings because I didn't realize it until I'd come out of this state, but I was sobbing with joy. My face was drenched, my shirt, the whole top of my shirt was wet. I was just pure, and I'm got the biggest smile on my face. I'm sure if those people I were judging next to me was looking at me, they probably would have thought I was on some sort of freaking drug, like I had done MDMA, trying to cross the border or something. Because I was just in this state of ecstasy and just pure love. And so I sat there with these emotions and just was in a state of awe of what I was experiencing. I didn't feel like I was in my body. I didn't feel the sensations of being in my body. I didn't even know that I was crying. I didn't know my face was wet, my shirt was wet. The vibration felt incredibly high based off of the emotions, the sensations, and even this almost like clairsentient pickup of the emotions of what other people were feeling. And people started walking past my car, and I was able to feel them emotionally. And then I finally started just to calm down, like vibrationally. And, I don't want to, it's not an out of body experience, but the vibration is so high that you don't feel like you're in your body. But I mean, I was definitely in my body. So yeah, that was
Lelenea,
the oneness.
that, first of all, I don't know how you're driving and having that whole experience because it sounded like a really long experience, but we talk a lot about oneness, about being one, about oneness, what it is.
Mhm.
Your explanation is the best explanation I
Mhm.
have ever heard in my entire life about what oneness
Mm.
is,
Thank
how it
you.
feels, how it looks. Like I almost felt like I was there with you while you were describing it. I mean, truly beautiful. And I
Thank you.
want to go back to a couple of things. So you talked about that book that you read. Tell
Mhm.
us the name again of the book that seemed to be the catalyst of the doorway of this for you.
Mm. So it's The Gene Keys by Richard Rudd.
Okay. So I want to talk about books because
Mhm.
It's interesting to me that this whole story started with I carried this book around with me for all of these years and I never read it.
Mm,
And my mother had a very similar experience. My mother had a book called Three Magic Words that she kept in her nightstand. She moved 7 times and she never took that book out over 25 years. And one day she took it out, she read it, and she was like, oh my gosh, you have to read it. And
mm,
that book was part of the beginning of my spiritual awakening. I can't even count how many times I've read that book. It's written in the 60s. It was almost kind of like The Secret before there was The Secret. It was
mm,
about understanding, and the three magic words, I'll be a spoiler alert, are you are God. It was
mm,
very interesting. And so I have had that experience, but I've also had an experience where somebody's told me about a book and I've picked it up and it didn't feel right. So
mm,
you touched on two things. So, number one, you touched on having something that you were drawn to for many years. So I want to ask you, number one, why do you think you carried it for so many years without reading it? And then at that particular point in time, all of a sudden you were like, boom, and read everything you could consume along those lines. What was it?
mm. So the first book, the one that I carried with me for a decade, 10 years, across continents and state lines, was The Celestine Prophecy by James Redfield. And I don't know. I have absolutely no understanding why I carried this damn book with me. And I moved so many times in so many places. I think there was a piece of me, like if I go back to that time when I was packing, going, oh, yeah, I do need to read this. Oh, yeah, it's in my queue. I do need to read this. And I'm a minimalist, but you get me in a bookstore and all hell breaks loose. And I've got stacks and stacks and huge queues. And I have to curb myself at many times because I'm like, oh my God, you have like 3 stacks of books you're trying to read. And I read 3 to 4 books at the same time. I move between them. And I think it just kept getting shifted and at the back of the queue. And then for some reason, all of a sudden, it was
It
like,
was
no,
time. It
you
was
need to read this.
time.
Yeah. And I don't think I would have got it prior. I wouldn't have been able to really integrate it. And
Hmm.
as I was reading this book, it was really inspirational in kind of awakening a part of me that hadn't been excited before. So this was a new part of me that was really, truly like I found excitement, right? And and it was just the right time. And then when I was crossing over in the border, so we weren't driving, we were just in back-to-back traffic, which was probably like a mile and a half to 2 miles away from the border. So I was just inching forward every like maybe 5 minutes. And that's when I was reading Richard Rudd's The Gene Keys, which is created and known to wake up information that lives within inside of you. And it's actually full circle now is a tool that I work with in my coaching practice that I will when I work with clients in terms of helping them become awakened, raising their consciousness, raising their vibration. And so it is now a tool for me. And I think it's just full circle, it's synchronicity.
Yeah. Hey, everybody watching. Hello. If you're here, there's probably a reason that
Yeah.
this video spoke to you and you opened it up and you got this far into it
Yeah.
because we're past the NDE. Some people just watch the
Yeah.
NDEs and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
jam, but you're still here. And so this might be a special message for
Mm-hmm.
you, and especially if you're working with this book. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, because I was going to ask you this question, and now I'm even more curious now that you said that you use it in your practice. I was going to ask you if you've ever talked to anybody else who's read the book and if they've had any similar experiences. But since you're actually using it, have
Mm-hmm.
you had other people have similar experiences?
No, so I haven't met anyone who's had a similar experience, and the clients that I work with who are using it have not had that experience as of yet. However, I am working with a client who is clairvoyant and who is trying to learn to harness his gift. And we've started utilizing the gene keys in our work together, and he's already expressed a huge degree of awakening of of epiphanies or pivots that are coming up in him, like a surge of knowing, a surge of information. So I have a feeling that what awaits him in his near future will be, you know, the clients that I work with, I have one that's manifesting at a level that I can't even comprehend. And I think I'm working with people that I can learn from. You know, I'm
That's a
supporting it.
beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm tethered to people who, you know, it's not just about me giving to them, it's reciprocal. And so I'm learning from them as their gifts are being released. And so what I'm going to learn from this person, I think, is just going to be transformational for both of us. So I'm excited to see how he relates to the gene keys and what happens for him in the near future.
That's very neat. I
Mhm.
want to go back to the boys that were playing football.
I love
You
those boys.
said that they had the biggest, most beautiful energy that you had ever seen, and you
Mhm.
described them as being around the age of, 9, 10.
Mhm.
Do you think it's because when you looked around, they were the only people that were that younger age, and as you're younger, before you get tainted in this
Mhm.
world, your energy is different? Or do you think it was because they were in such a state of bliss playing that game together, or that they were fully present? Why do
Mhm.
you think they looked so beautiful compared to even everybody else that looked beautiful, but they were even
Mhm.
more so around you?
I think that it is a combination of their age, that they are sitting in their authenticity. They haven't yet learned to hide themselves or mask themselves. And they're playing with one another. They're throwing a ball back and forth and are so in the moment. You can't really throw a ball back and forth and not truly be present. Um, Especially at that age when you're that engaged. I think seeing them so present with one another and their experience and them at their age, the light that they were radiating was just absolutely profound. It was otherworldly. And, you know, it was viewing them, probably, I viewed them the most because they shifted from one side of me over to the other side. And, towards the end of it, I was getting, people call them downloads. I never knew what to call it, but we'll just go with that. I was getting information or downloads, and it was just a surge of knowledge that was filling me. And it was as I was watching the boys on the left side of me, and the information was, don't you understand? You are all fragments, and it was speaking to me. You are all fragments of source. You are all connected. That these people are you. They just chose to have a different experience. So through them, you actually get to have that experience. So one of the hacks, the human hacks, is that if we allow ourselves to sit in a very empathic place and connect with other people and be very in the moment and in the connection, we can live multiple lives in one, because we can experience the life that this other fragment of source is living. And um God, what else did I get from that? That through emotions is what connects us all. So even a complete stranger, you have felt one of the emotions, or many of the emotions that they have felt, and that emotions itself is the energy that is the tether. That is what connects you. So we're all moving along these same energetic lines, right? Um,
And you
yeah.
saw those lines. You physically saw those as little golden strands when you were talking about them
Mhm.
moving through the trees and everything.
Mhm. They were just moving through person and person and through the trees and back to me. It was, and I still, in that moment, I remember thinking, like, what the hell is this? And I remember thinking, is this coming from me or is this coming to me? Like, I didn't in that moment understand, what my role or where I was in that.
What do you
And,
think now?
integrating it and embodying it, um, what I recognized, it wasn't coming to me or from me, that it all just is. It all is already. I'm a part of it. It's something I'm tethered. It's the energy that I'm tethered to. um it is what connects me to them, to you, to everyone watching this. I've never met you, but I'm deeply connected to you, and we're all connected to one another. And by seeing, a complete stranger, by seeing them thrive, I'm thriving, I'm evolving, and it's such a beautiful message to recognize.
I love that.
Mhm.
Since you mentioned the trees, you reminded me of something that you said a while back, and that was that after you had this experience, you found yourself having an experience similar to your near-death experience in a field when you were just reading and you were in
Mhm.
nature. So I want to talk about nature a little bit because nature
Mhm.
plays a very, very pivotal part in my life. And
Mhm.
for the people that are watching, we're not going to necessarily have an NDE. We're probably not. So I like to try to talk to my guests and get practical tips that everybody can implement. And I think nature's one of them. And I'll just share for me, for many, many years, probably 30 years, I have to spend some time in nature every single day. I'm an everyday hiker. It's part of why I
Mhm.
moved to Arizona. And some of it's for the exercise, but I've realized as I've gotten older and spent more and more time in nature, it's because that's what grounds me and that's what elevates my emotional state and my vibration because you're able to connect to what is part of the earth, what is part of, our kind of
Mhm.
our birthright of what we really are, and let go of all the worldly things like the news and the politics
Mhm.
and all those other things that pervade. So will
Mhm.
you speak a little bit to your nature practices and how you feel about it too?
Yeah, so I 100% agree with you. And to separate ourselves from nature is creating the illusion of separateness. So we are not separate from source. And you can replace the word source with whatever you want to replace it with, right? If you want to give it God, Jesus, Allah, whatever you want to give it is up to you. It's personal. I call it source.
Me too. Me
Yeah.
too.
And so, it's just because even if it is Jesus or Allah, it's still a source, right? So I also recognize that Mother Nature is an entity in herself. She is a vibration. And so for me, being in nature allows me to have an energetic reset. It's a recalibration. And what we do know is that trees and plant life, just as us, has an electromagnetic field. And I actually have quite a few clients that, I practice with them to do heart grounding meditation using trees. So, if you plant your hands on a tree and you do a heartfelt meditation, drop into your heart space, and really focus on the electromagnetic frequency that you're vibrating, you're emitting, and the tree is also emitting one, that it is a form of recalibration. And I had a client not too long ago who said that she had seen a couple people on her hike in the woods that were doing a heartfelt tree meditation, and she was thinking, I wonder if they're clients of Lelena's. There's like a whole, there's a whole forest of people that you can tell who's working with me and who isn't based on who's touching trees.
I love this. So I did an interview in December with a man named David Miller who had an NDE, and he had the angels come to him and he was tasked with this manifesto. It was a 7-page written document that was downloaded to him and he slept through writing it. He doesn't remember writing it, but they told him that he was to save the ancient giant trees of the world. And this was
What?
30 years ago. He has now cloned every single like 136 species of trees, like the giant redwoods and cypress and um, all of these sequoia trees. And I did an amazing interview with him, and I'm releasing it in April on the 24th on Arbor Day of 2024.
Mm.
So I'm so glad you brought that up because in his video, he also talked about how over his 30-year journey, actually his lifetime journey with trees, he's been an arborist before this all happened
Wow.
to him, but how he talks about he steps up to the tree and he puts his back against it, puts his hands on it, and then it tries to have you have to become silent, and then you
Uh-huh.
can connect. And he said you'll be able to hear the trees, and they talk about the frequencies, and the trees are antennas to space, And the trees actually bring in different frequencies from outer space to help protect the earth, which is so why it's so important to save our trees. So thank you
Wow.
so much. I'm so glad that because it's like another
Yeah.
confirmation for me as I'm hearing these things and
Hmm.
you're talking about it, and other
Hmm.
people are now going to be hearing it and
Hmm.
exposing to it, that everybody needs to go out and pick your favorite
Hmm.
tree, maybe the
Hmm.
largest tree that you know,
Hmm.
and go up
Hmm.
to it, or the most ancient tree, or even just, the one that's in
Hmm.
your yard, and see if you can connect to
Hmm.
your trees. It's a
Oh,
real thing.
absolutely. It's a real thing. I mean, there's science that supports it.
Yes.
And so, what we're learning is a lot of, spirituality, or what's at one point was considered wooism or woo-woo.
I
I
love
should
that you
call it
brought the
wooism.
Buddhism. That's the
Yeah.
best.
I always call it wooism. So
I
it's like,
love it. I'm going
it,
to borrow that from you. Thank you.
totally. So it's like, whatever is at one point was considered wooism, as we look at quantum physics, we're
Yeah.
actually seeing a lot of what was considered spooky or woo-woo or spiritual. There's science behind it.
Yeah,
And
the mycelium actually can communicate
yes,
with each
yes,
other under the earth.
there's a whole
The
network.
yeah, the
Yeah.
trees will actually put chemical into
Hmm.
their root system to protect their offspring from
Hmm.
harmful things. It's
And they send
amazing.
messages and
Yeah.
signals, and then the mycelium network as well that's underground. And so it is this really beautiful communication, and we're a part of it. And what's amazing is that, you know, I can tell people who don't go out into nature because there is an energy of separateness within them. Like they don't feel as connected. Um, they don't feel as vulnerable, and there's almost a lack of empathy watching them interact with other human beings. And I
Hmm.
think it's a disservice when we don't learn that we are very much made up the same material as what are in the forest, right? And of this planet. We're not separate in any way, shape, or form. We are very much connected. And it's one of the reasons I moved to the Pacific Northwest, because these particular forests are forests that allow me to feel so unbelievably connected. And when I come out of these forests, I'm high. I'm
Hmm.
literally, my vibration is so freaking high. And then that's when I go and do some of the big stuff that I really need to do. Like if there's something that's kind of stressing me, or it feels like there's resistance, or a big concept, a big idea, a big decision that needs to be made, I go and do an energetic reset out in the woods. I ground myself, and then I raise my vibration, and I come out of there. And then that's when I go and tackle whatever it is that I need to tackle.
So it sounds like you're definitely an empath. So an empath connects to people's emotions and feels them. And you
Mhm.
explained how you've been able to have these amazing experiences of
Mhm.
oneness and slowing down time and just being in a moment and absorbing everything around you. What else? What other abilities did you pick up after your near death experience?
Mm. Well, I would say that, I was an empath as a child, and also, grew up in, had some very traumatic events in my upbringing that made me a bit more hyper vigilant, which means that we lean into empathy a bit more, and energy, reading energy, because it's a survival mechanism.
Hmm.
And but I was doing some work. I had a psychiatrist for quite some time that I was working with, who's Jungian, um, and uh, is very enthralled and intrigued with empaths, and a lot of her work is with those who are empaths. And through questions and experiences, she coined me as clairsentient. So you have a highly sensitive person, you have an empath, and then you have a clairsentient who is able to, I think what I understand it is to go, and I can say from my own experience, is to feel this, the energy of the other person, and even recognize the storyline. So I've had some moments and conversations, even, discovery calls with potential clients, where they're expressing their experience of something. And within, a few moments, I'm able to understand their story, their narrative. You know, this woman was talking to me about her experience with her daughter who has a medical disorder, and that's all she left me with. And I immediately felt bulimia. The daughter's having trouble. She's divorced, blames the mother. Like I had all these rush of emotions that were coming out up to me. And, you know, I didn't want to just vomit what I was experiencing onto her. And so through questions and better understanding if we were a good fit for one another, it all started to come out and I was dead on everything. And it's, I'm learning more about it myself because I disassociated from it for a very long time, just thinking that, you know, what I had been told by previous partners or people in my life is like, you're just too sensitive, or, you know, there's always, you know, some sort of reaction to it. And I didn't understand it myself. So I thought that I was a problem. But now that I understand it, I can lean into it. I'm learning about it more. And the more I lean into it and the more I harness it, the more it's expanding and growing. And now instead of being of a disservice, it's actually of a service. And it's allowing me to support others in a way that I never thought or recognized that it would. And it's making my life significantly easier as well as I lean into it. But in order to lean into it, I had to let go of a lot of belief systems, energetic blocks. I left drinking behind. You know, there's a lot of like cleansing the body and reframing from things that numb the sensitivity. Like I don't watch TV. I don't even allow TVs in my house. Like there's a lot that goes into it, in order to remain open and sensitive and still have boundaries, energetic boundaries, to know what is yours and what is not yours.
That's really interesting. I feel like what you've described is what is a psychic medium. They have the different clairs, so clear audience,
Mm,
clairvoyance, clairsentience, claircognizance.
mm,
And it sounds like you have one of those clairs, and that's allowing you to connect with your clients then to help
mhm,
you better understand to work with them. So why don't you explain a little bit about what you do and how you work with the clients and how people can find you if they would like to connect and work
mm.
with you?
Thank you. I appreciate you asking that.
Hmm.
So
The reason I'm asking is because I'm sure everybody watching is like, "Oh my gosh, how can I work with her? She's so great."
oh, thank you. So I work in something that I call integrative consciousness. And so it is recognizing, you know, we do a lot of intense work in recognizing the narratives and the energetic blocks and the stories and the patterns and the programming that is really holding a person back um, from being in flow with the universe, for allowing synchronicities to allow a person to really experience what it is to be in alignment with your higher self, to be in alignment with source. You know, what I'm realizing and also recognize from my own past self is how we do ourselves such a disservice. We're fighting. We're fighting our innate gifts. We're fighting our authenticity. We feel exhausted. We feel drained. We feel like nothing is working out for us. We feel like the world is against us. The universe is against us. We look at other people. Well, why is their life so easy? And so, you know, really being trapped in um, these mindsets that are not of service to us. And when we can free ourselves and really surrender to ourselves, and we can become more in alignment. So there's an array of work that I work in tandem with my clients, and to help raise consciousness and then integrate it. I have quite a few clients that I work with before and after their plant medicine journeys to help integrate. I am working with a particular client. He's my first one, but he's clairvoyant, in helping him harness his innate gift and create energetic boundaries so that he is not consumed by the energy and the emotions of what's happening around him. Um, a lot of my clients which this is my absolute favorite, but a lot of them, so the whole concept of a midlife crisis is is a complete flaw, and it's a sham. And what I'm recognizing is that these people are going through spiritual awakenings and egoic deaths, and they're going through one of the most beautiful transformations in their human experience. And, you know, they go to a professional and are given an antidepressant. And, you know, if they're really able to get the support and somebody that works in tandem with them, to really recognize what is happening, they have the most amazing ability and momentum behind them to really harness, step into their authenticity and harness the life that they're meant to live. They're being redirected. So, you know, I have a website. You're, you know, welcome to go online and
Sure. Oh, I can put that in the show notes for
yeah,
everybody to find you. I'm
yeah,
really glad you shared that about the midlife crisis because I
it's,
remember
yeah.
reading a long time ago that the plasticity of the brain, they used to think that it was stagnant, but it's not. And
Mhm.
that when you become around the age of 40, there's something that changes in the brain that actually opens you up to
Mhm.
being more open to having a spiritually transformative
Mm.
experience. Like you hear
Mhm.
about people having a Kundalini awakening or
Yep.
being drawn to these medicine journeys, like
Mhm.
you mentioned, and that all happens when the brain changes around the age of 40.
Yeah,
Makes sense to
it's
me.
yeah, it completely makes sense to me. And you know, that's when my greatest changes happened. And you know, I love the work that's happening around neuroplasticity, and a lot of the work that I do helps create or rewire new neurological pathways to help support people in their new programming and their opening and their sensitivity. And there's just so much more information and science that's coming out to really support the growth and the experience of the human journey, and you know, being a soul in human form. So it is just, it is such a beautiful experience to be here. And my goal is just to support people so that they can really sit in this experience and recognize how fucking incredible this is. We're so lucky. This is just so magnificent to be here.
Yes, we all
Yeah.
chose to be here right
Yeah.
now. And
Yeah.
thank you for sharing your message because it is my purpose to try and help people wake up to the power of who they are. And it's through having guests like you,
Mhm.
telling your story, sharing your experiences, sharing things that they can do to help even increase that, that everybody wins. So thank you
Mhm.
so much, Lelena. Did I say that right?
Lalania.
Lelena. I'm going to get it right.
No worries. No
Thank
worries
you
at all.
so much,
Yeah.
Lelenea, for coming on and for sharing everything with us. I just so appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Mhm. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.